Okay. So this is the main meeting of the Faculty Advisory Committee 2021. And I guess we can get started. So begin with approval of the agenda.
So move.
Okay.
Second.
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, and move along to number 2. So approval of the March minutes. This time the links are right. So approval of the March minutes. Motion to approve, anyone?
Quiet group today. I'll move that.
I'll second.
All right. Has everyone had a chance to look them over? Any modifications?
I think one of them, I think it might have been the one that we met with Ben Barnes. It says Naugatuck Valley is allotted 6 million, and the entire system is allotted 10 million. That should say 16 million. I think the table that I was looking at when I said that was that NVCC was allotted 16 million over the course of the past year of the HERF money, and the HERF money, and the whole system was 10. I think.
The 10 was specifically for HERF 2.
Yeah, but I think that was the 10 was for the entire system is what was being allotted, right? And I had noted that in his table that Naugatuck Valley institutional funds were 16 million, and so that's why the math didn't make sense.
Well, it was Verona was kind of mixing it because the 10 million referenced only HERF 2, and Naugatuck Valley
that was only HERF. Okay, so that was only HERF 2. Okay.
Yes.
So then I guess it was 6 million then. Then that's correct then.
So and as written, it says the right thing, right? Okay.
Yeah. Now that Lois reminds me, yes.
Okay. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hey, Myrna. Okay, so that's April minutes approved. Okay, and we have this time sort of addenda. So these are the documents that were provided, and that's linked in the agenda also. I think we need to share it, but they include what Ben Barnes provided us, the letter on equity, a summary of the ACME meeting with the regents, and the Naugatuck Valley resolution. I think that's it. Oh, and the Gateway resolution. And the map flurry. Okay, so we have a PDF additions to that. Do we need to approve those? I don't think we need to approve those separately, but all of the provided documents will be added as an addendum. Okay. All right, so reports of the chair and vice chair. Here we are. Do you want to start, David?
Okay. For the Finance Committee, that's the first item on the agenda. There were a number of interesting things which to your attention, if I can just get it here. The budget statement includes a breakdown of the HERF funds, the 3 different tranches of them total together. And as I think I mentioned before, a total of $353 million came into the CSU system to be distributed between students and student aid, largely compensation for missed opportunities and evacuation of residences and so forth, and institutional aid. I think that the relevant, I'm going to, if I can show this on screen, Lena, do I have?
Make sure. Do you have access? Check it. You should, but if not, I will.
I've now forgotten how to do this. Well, I'll give them the numbers as they are. Oh, here it is, share. And I want to share the PowerPoint. So the total for here 1 through 3 was 353 million. Already spent 148.9 and planned and under consideration 209 million. Now again, part of that goes to student aid, part of that goes to institutional aid. For the community colleges, there is at this present time $84 million, which is planned or under consideration. $33 million for lost revenues, $41 million for something which doesn't appear in the university listing, but appears only for the community colleges system and campus initiatives. I'll come back to that. Contingency being held back 10.0, and total still to be distributed of 84 million. For the CSUs, if we look at the institutional aid component, CCSU still has 13 million to spend, Eastern 6.1, Southern 9.9, and Western, which I think has its budget concerns, has already spent all of it. So there's nothing left there. If we look at the system and campus initiative, in a meeting that we had with Ben Barnes, and I can't remember if it was a previous FAC meeting. I don't think so. It must have been a meeting with Kalina and some others on another occasion. It was indicated that at this point, in terms of planning, the bulk of that would go to guided pathways for the hiring of the 200 professional advisors. Right, and there is a concern here, and I brought it up at the Finance and Infrastructure Committee meeting. Namely, that what had been planned in the previous budget that we looked at was that there would be a pilot project for guided pathways and holistic case management at 3 of the community colleges, and that based on the results of that, there would be an evaluation of how to proceed. Here, there was, at least at that point when we spoke with Ben Barnes, and he wasn't, I have to admit, certain that this was how it was going to be spent, but certainly one of the plans was to skip, as it were, that pilot project stage and fully fund it. And then, of course, the question arises, well, how do you pay for it after 2 years? And once you've used up all your money that you got in this emergency allocation? And the answer was a projection that student retention would increase by something like 10%, that students on average would take an extra 3 credits. But there is no basis in data collected so far that is the case. So that's all a projection through to the mid-2020s. Secondly, and I hope I'm still showing this, here's a quote from the Finance and Infrastructure Report that I think is really relevant for discussions that we have had here, and that's the question of shared services. And I have a further elaboration on that, but this is a quote from it. This is not me, this is the report. More than 250 staff who were previously budgeted within campus budgets have been moved into the shared services budget, lowering campus costs by over $32 million. 89 employees previously included in the system office and costing $17.4 million have been moved into shared services. These $49.5 million in savings are offset by $51 million in cost allocation for the shared services. The difference reflects a small number of new positions as well as minor adjustments in cost allocations to the universities. So the issue here is clearly there is no cost saving from shared services. There is centralization of control, of course. And the question arises, how then will the supposed savings going to be made? And presumably that will be through attrition, non-filling of positions as people retire or leave. And 2 questions obviously arise, and I asked that at the Finance Committee. One is, it looks like what people will be doing is largely not serving the institutions, principally, but learning how to do somebody else's job as they begin to accumulate two and more positions. And secondly, how does this centralization guarantee the quality of service which had been provided while folks were local to the institutions? And I think those are important questions that we need to look at. The third issue that came up, well, it didn't come up, and that maybe will be related to a point later on in the agenda, and that is the funding for the just-in-time teaching for the conversion of prerequisite to co-requisite courses. There was no discussion of any budget for that, and there was no item under consideration on that issue. So those are, I think, the three major things. Let me just add one more point, if I can get it up here on my computer, and that is, and I'm going to stop this sharing if I can.
While David's doing that, I would just like to say that the people can retire from the campus just as easily as they can retire from the system office. Attrition, what a big savings that is.
The other thing, David, is I think we need to stop talking about this as a co-requisite model. Kalina has really done a good job of showing that a co-requisite model means that the courses, the supports are requisite, and the model that they're using is that these supports are voluntary, so it's not actually a co-requisite model.
And Jen has a raised hand. I don't know if you can see that, David.
David, you're on mute.
Should I just go, Kalina? Hi, everyone. I just wanted to I wanted to give a quick update on the PA 1240 Council relating to this issue, if that's okay. So at the PA 1240 meeting, Mike Stefanowicz came to that because he's the new co-chair. He actually called the meeting. Mike Rook was there, David Levinson, and Fran Navarro was there, and so were the CSIC co-chairs and Mike Bukaris, who's the other co-chair of the PA 1240 Council. They stated at the council meeting that Math has taken up this guided pathways work, and they're going to be hiring or giving people funds over the summer to do the work. On the English side, CSET is working together with the PA 1240 Council to request that a research plan be put into place to kick this down the road to 2025. So what we were arguing at the meeting is that faculty aren't going to design curriculum through CSET, but what we would be willing to engage in is a discussion about creating a research model that will take the developmental learners and the ones that would be put in a pilot program to be able to show what they can do in terms of reading comprehension, to follow up on the point that this isn't a co-requisite model. So in other words, they're trying to put everyone in college comp on the English side. And the faculty don't want to participate for lots of reasons, but the biggest reason is that we don't think that there's been an opportunity for us to look over all of the models at the various institutions across the country and to ask questions to see how it was funded, how much money was spent, who eliminated developmental and who brought it back. So we are in negotiations sort of with the PA 1240 Council that ACME has taken over to say, let's slow down on the curriculum design and let's look at how we can make decisions and have a real conversation here as opposed to you just telling us what to do. They also are making an appeal for CSET to do work paid over the summer. And I know that is a request that the chairs have to bring back to the committee on Friday, but I think that the answer, just off the record, I think the answer will be a strong no, because we don't want to participate in that. But I just wanted to give you an update that they very much are looking for faculty participation. And we're very much arguing that if that this should be pushed to 2025. Fran's response to that was that all the curriculum has to be aligned by this coming spring 2022, because by 2023, everybody has to be doing the same thing. And she kept giving all these arguments about how that can't be done because campuses are all over the place with the 096, 101 classes. And in reality, what we argued to her was that they're not, and this is why. And we explained everything and said that that work isn't complicated at all. And so essentially on the English side, just so you guys know, we're pushing back to not participate. We're demanding a research model. We're trying to push this out to 2025. And it seems like we're getting a little bit somewhere. So those meetings are happening. I'm sorry, Colleen, I didn't give you an update sooner, but that's all been happening behind the scenes. And so I think that's good news from the English side. The math folks seem like they're participating fully in guided pathways. Sorry about that long-winded interjection. Thank you.
And I'll just say that the math folks will not characterize their participation that way, but we'll get to that later. It is confusing though.
Yeah, that's how they presented it to the English side. They're like, well, math is all in and they're getting paid this summer and they're doing it. What's your problem? And we were like, let's all take a step back here. So did you have a question for me, Ron?
No, I just wanted to add to what you said, because we're talking about, being promised pay over the summer. We met with our AFT president yesterday, and he said that the union will be filing a complaint with the Labor Relations Board because these payments that are being made to individual faculty member are a violation of union negotiation. You can't negotiate with individual members of the union for pay. That has to be agreed to by the union, and the unions, as we know, have stated that they are opposed to faculty getting paid for this work.
That's an interesting point, and I think when the piece in the document I wanted to note was that they're acting like they're asking CSET to participate, but very clearly in the literature, it states the provost will select the faculty that get to participate. So in fact, they are actually not just asking all the faculty in the English group, they're arguing that the provost will be selecting these people as well, which might be a stronger argument for the union.
Well, I've found my unmute button. So I'm back. Thank you, Jennifer. I mentioned Acme, and that certainly got a reaction. Very, very cogently presented on your part, by the way. Much better than I certainly could have done. I'm not directly involved. The last thing I just want to mention is I asked for clarification on shared services, and I got a further spreadsheet which indicates that by FY22, at this point there are approximately 250 people under shared services. By FY22, it's expected there'll be 369. So that gives you an idea of the extent, largely for people in the so-called EMSA, which I believe is Enrollment Management and Student Affairs. 204 is the number that I have on my spreadsheet. So that concludes my little report on the Finance Committee.
I have a question. This is Myrna. And I think it's just rumor. I just wanted to find out if anyone has heard that some of these dollars that you're saying and itemized areas, if anyone mentioned that some of the monies will be used to provide increases for management in their salaries. Has anyone heard that? And is that, I don't see anything there that talks about that unless I'm missing the categories, David.
Well, there was that quote, which is that the difference between the $49.5 million in savings, in quotation marks, offset by $51 million in cost allocations, it mentions minor adjustments in cost allocations to the universities. A small number of new positions as well as minor adjustments in cost allocations. That's the only other information that I have. But that is, I think, quite possible and probable that there are salary adjustments. If somebody is transferred from a position at a campus to a position at the system office, whether it be on Woodland Street or the proposed new one in New Britain, with a different title, then there could well be an adjustment of salary. I'm going to ask about that.
Thank you. And the reason I mention that is because if you recall, Stephen and other members of the group, I think, provided the salary adjustments already for some of those new positions that were the hiring of the new positions up at the board office, which really are outrageously high on the scale, the salary scale, as opposed to individuals who are doing the same type of work locally on campuses. So that's a really important for us, at least from the union's perspective. So thank you.
Thanks. And David, do you want to talk about the CSCU president?
Yeah, briefly. I'd say that in general, the procedure went as planned and quite smoothly. There were, without going into details, because that's under confidentiality, there were 40 plus candidates, of which, as is typical in any open competition, there are a certain number who were obviously not qualified, but certainly 90% of those were minimally qualified. The advisory board looked into and made a recommendation to the board search committee of about 10 or so names that we considered the most appropriate, and that was a meeting of the whole advisory committee. That's nearly 40 people. The board search committee then narrowed it down to 4, and we interviewed by group. So it wasn't the whole advisory committee, but I participated in the faculty group. So I think there was 6 or 7 of us who interviewed for about an hour each of the 4 finalists. What I can say is that I can only speak personally here, but certainly an important consideration for me was that the person have firsthand knowledge of public higher education in Connecticut. Secondly, that the person have significant teaching experience. And thirdly, that the person, when we meet with them, is willing to interact with us, even if we don't have an agreement or cannot possibly reach agreement in that short period of time, nonetheless listens and interacts. Of the candidates that we saw, I would say that clearly Terence Chang was my personal choice. He has the Connecticut experience in public higher education as director of the Stamford campus of the University of Connecticut. He has gone through the ranks, assistant professor, associate professor, and full professor. There were very few in the group who did that. There were some in the group of finalists who had no experience whatever in the classroom, others up to the level of assistant professor, occasionally to the level of associate professor, very few to the level of full professor, as in the case of Terence Chang. And when we met with him, I would say that he was highly interactive. It was an enjoyable conversation. The point was not to reach agreement on anything, but to find out whether we could discuss. And that certainly seemed to me the case. Consequently, I did send him a short letter of congratulations. I can read it here quickly. As vice chair of the Faculty Advisory Committee, I'd like to welcome Terence Chang. This I intended, by the way, to give as a statement at the board meeting, once I knew slightly in advance of the meeting, who was going to be the choice. However, the meeting was run rather tightly, and there was only an opportunity for Dan Barrett, who was co-chair of the advisory committee and chair of the faculty group, to make a brief several sentence statement. So here's what I would have said had I had the occasion. As vice chair of the faculty advisory committee, I'd like to welcome Terence Chang as a new president of CSCU and wish him well in the accomplishment of his responsibilities. As I was in addition a member of the advisory selection committee, I had the pleasure of meeting Terence Chang for an interview and was impressed by his administrative background, his knowledge of public higher education in Connecticut, and his faculty experience both in teaching and creative activity. I also appreciated his enthusiasm and his candor. I am further pleased that there was such a congruence of views between the faculty group of the advisory committee and the board search committee in selecting the best candidate. We face a significant challenge over the best strategy for the CSU system to defend, promote, and expand public higher education in our state. It's my hope that with President Chang, we can review and revise current plans, find common ground, appropriately articulate shared governance, fully implement the distinct missions of the colleges and universities, and respect their integrity and autonomy, thereby moving beyond our current divisions. This will greatly contribute to achieving our shared goal of increasing student enrollment, retention, and graduation, and overcoming the achievement gap in the service of equity and social justice. I think that with some imagination, some compromise, and a lot of creativity, today can mark an inflection point in that direction. Again, welcome President Chang and best wishes. I and my colleague, Kalina Sasanker, Chair of the FAC, look forward to meeting with you in the near future. And he responded quite generously to me. It took him a few days. He had a couple of emails in his mailbox. But that's basically my report. I was, let me say, satisfied with the procedure, which rolled out as planned. I think perhaps the only change to the process as initially stated was that, to my knowledge, Governor Lamont met with either President Terrence Chang once he'd been chosen, or with the 4 candidates, I'm not sure, but that was an addition. He had done the same for the president, well, the soon-to-be ex-president of UConn 2 years ago when that was under consideration.
Mike and then Lois.
I think Lois was ahead of me. I'll go after her. You're muted.
Yeah, I think you were actually ahead of me, Mike.
Oh, you want me to go first? Okay.
Sure.
So first of all, David, that email is spoken like a true professor of peace studies. That was really, I mean, in a serious way, it was very good. I was shocked, as I think you're implying you were too, based on what I'd heard, that they picked him. I'm glad they picked him. I'm surprised. I kind of agree with all your points about him and about, everything you've said. The only thing I wanted to say was, first of all, thank you for sending him that invitation, congratulations. And also, I'm wondering if we, like we did with Jane Gates, I think we should invite him as soon. I know you two are gonna meet with him, but I think he should come to FAC as soon as possible. Because I think it's our one hope right now to try to make some change happen. He just seems to be, from what I've heard from you and others, a person who's going to listen and doesn't think that some of this is a good idea. So anyway, I would just urge us to invite him as soon as possible. But thank you for, first of all, serving on the committee and for sending him that email. And I'm so glad that, there was such agreement between the two hiring committees. It's a good sign. Maybe the Board of Regents is rethinking some things. I don't know, but I'm glad that it happened that way. Thank you. Sorry I spoke too much.
Lois?
Yeah, I guess I'm just a little bit curious as to his qualifications. Yes, that's the fact that he rose up from the ranks as faculty is a good thing, but I would remind you that Jane Gates also did that, and David Levinson. But I don't understand how a director of a branch campus would qualify him to be the president of this whole system. And I'm not saying anything for or against him. I hear certain things, but I am curious about the qualifications issue.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things here. First of all, with respect to the comments by Mike Shea, he was quite interactive in our discussion. That doesn't mean he's going to agree with us. And I would suspect that, the board has chosen somebody who is or has expressed a degree of commitment, a fairly high degree of commitment to students first. So we're going to have a discussion, right? But I do think that his demeanor and his candor at the discussion that we had with him at the selection committee indicates that interaction is possible. But I don't think we should overestimate the extent to which someone who has been chosen by the board is going to be necessarily in agreement with us. To the contrary. Secondly, we're going to have to win that through our proposals and through the strategy we adopt. Secondly, to respond to Lois, I myself am not quite sure of what a director of a campus at UConn involves. It strikes me that it's somewhat higher than a dean, but in any case, he certainly has a considerable number of years, and I can't remember. I didn't keep his CV, although it is available online through UConn. But he has a considerable administrative experience, considerable teaching experience, and also creative activity. He has the MFA from University of Miami, so that's a terminal degree for creative writing. And he has a number of novels which have been translated into other languages, as well as a considerable number of essays. And so that was a bit of fresh air. Most of the people who have applied for the job were EDDs, or in the case of PhDs in education, and their CV read, with kinds of things that we do as regular reports to our university senates, retention of students in third year to fourth year and that kind of a thing. So there were a number of distinguishing features for Cheng, but I can't go into any detail, since really that wasn't the discussion we had with him of the extent of his administrative experience. But he certainly has met the criteria that I had for knowledge of public higher education in Connecticut, experience through the ranks as a faculty member, and willingness to interact with us, although not necessarily to agree.
I would fully agree with you. I would assume the Board of Regents hired somebody who was going to yes them to death. I'm still a little concerned about his qualifications. I also understand that under the circumstances, we probably didn't get up, those 40 candidates were probably not the best candidates in the world, because who in the world would be applying for that position at this point in time, considering the mess we're in? But I'm still going to voice my concerns about his qualifications. But, I was just asking that question. It might have been a bit rhetorical, because I think you're right that the Board of Regents was going to hire somebody who was going to agree with whatever they wanted. So thank you for responding, but thanks.
Well, I'd like to hope there's space for a new direction, right? It's a nice fresh start. Let's hope. And Mike's hand is up again. Go ahead. And Fran, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I understand the lack of experience on the one hand, which is a disadvantage, but it might also be an advantage. I mean, as David was talking about, the kind of people, I mean, I'm just, I like Colina, I'm just hopeful, although I also, maybe they want someone to agree with them, but maybe they're starting to rethink this because of the bad publicity they're getting. I don't know, but mainly I'm kind of glad he doesn't have the kind of experience that I would have expected them to want in a person and hire that person, who would be the kind of person David, I think, was talking about. And so I'm happy that he's a little bit of a fresh, doesn't have a lot of experience, because it might open him up to novel ideas. Okay, novel ideas.
Let me just add one thing, which I can add because I'm now refreshing my memory. He has the position of director of the Stanford campus since 2016. So that's 5 years of experience at that level at UConn. Previously, he was the associate provost and assistant vice president for academic programs at Brooklyn College at the City University of New York. That goes back to 2013. And previous to that, at Lehman College, he was the Associate Dean, School of Arts and Humanities, and before that, Chair of the Department of English. So that goes back to 2009. So let me just add that. And I think that there's an interesting aspect to that, which is the experience in New York City. I think that may allow for some elements of a different perspective. All right. So it is important that he has the public higher education experience here in Connecticut, but I think it's a plus that he has that experience at the CUNY system in New York City.
Brent?
Yeah, Mike's already kind of anticipated my thought, but you know, our candidate is on the younger side. He doesn't have experience running a system of this side, but I agree. I think this is a possible opportunity. What's most encouraging is he has this very strong liberal arts background. And I'm going to show my own bias here, but I find a lot of people in liberal arts are very creative and thinking. And, you know, he's in a creative field too, or was as an academic. So perhaps there's an opportunity here to help him do his job, which is what we're here to do. And maybe he'd be open to that. And in so doing, you know, maybe we can square this circle and figure out some way of making something of Students First, which will allow the board to save face and, you know, allow us to preserve our colleges at the same time. We can hope, at least.
I'll say I like that he has his whole track record is in public higher ed too, and that matters also. All right, should we move on? So I guess here's where I'm supposed to report on the Academic and Student Affairs Committee and CCIC meeting that preceded it. I'll try to be quick because, you know, we've been dealing with this ACME saga for 6 months, and now it is board policy. Usually going through the full board is simply a formality after it's gone through committee. At CCIC, I will say that there remained a lack of engagement with faculty feedback, right? We know that CSET, CMAC, ESL Council, PA 1240 folks, you know, within those groups, and the people who worked on the ACME work group themselves all produced, you know, documents that were well researched. They were invested in the data. They are actually putting forward proposals that they believe are informed by that data. And it's the very same studies that the system office is offering us. But, you know, despite all of that, the conversation at CCIC did not engage with the content, and it was more of a wish that faculty would read the studies, the very same studies that they've produced these documents on, and somehow internalize their content and therefore be convinced of the efficacy of the ACME proposal. So that's really where I did my best to represent these folks and all their wonderful documents. But when the vote came up, I tried to make it as clear as possible because the discussion was this. We should just take a leap, right? If it's good for some students, maybe it's good for all. I mean, as basic a logical mistake as you could make, but whatever. And the insistence was that, well, because we have to concede to the evidence. But the evidence has not been provided. And I made it clear there and before. The evidence that is necessary to underwrite that policy is that there is some system or institution in which they have completely eliminated developmental education, all standalone courses, right? And that all of the supports offered for students that they put straight into college level courses are optional. And I want to, you know, we have to see that that implementation is successful. And if it's successful, then we need to look at the funding structure and the time of implementation, right? And I believe, and this is the dynamic that I find interesting, I believe that when it was voted on, you know, by a group of folks who are CEOs of colleges, as well as some system office folks. It is impossible to withhold a vote from something like that without it implying a lack of trust in your colleagues who are telling you that they've done the work, they've done the research, they're telling you the evidence stands in favor of this, right? So the conversation was, if this, you know, my position was, if this evidence exists, you should vote on it. If it doesn't exist, then you shouldn't vote on it. The vote was taken, as far as I can tell, in the assumption that such evidence existed. It does not, as far as it's still not been produced, right? So given that there's no evidence, we're gambling with our most vulnerable students. That's my take on it. At ASA, our student regent had gotten the Southern resolution that Central has also endorsed. And she was very clear that she was not in support of the policy because of her experiences. She goes to Housatonic. So because of her experiences in our system, and she was particularly concerned with the funding, right? If you shouldn't be approving something if you don't know where the funding's coming from, because if it's inadequately funding it, it possibly will be harmful. She was very clear on that. And when it became apparent that it would be approved, she asked for a roll call vote and voted against it. She was the only vote against it. Everybody else voted in favor. So, you know, I give you these details because it is my opinion that we just approved policy, the effects of which will amount to racist policy, if not classist policy. We're basically not caring enough for our most underserved students already, underserved by the state of Connecticut. That's my feeling. So I feel like that needs to be said as clearly as is possible. And all the opportunities were there to fix it. The policy as it stands, the two things that it specifically excludes, it says, oh, faculty gets to develop whatever happens in here. But the things that it specifically excludes are precisely the things that faculty say will be harmful. So it removes the ability to address the issues that faculty say stand in between them and actually being able to ensure the quality of the curriculum, right? NETI standard 3.15. And I think that needs to be made clear. I was very surprised that they were so comfortable voting against both the faculty and the student representative. I think that's just weird. So the videos linked in the agenda. The documents from the CCIC meeting are linked in the agenda. There's this thing called CCSU Acme Building on Student Success, which is just like pictures but no real content, which I think is representative of the quality of the sort of evidence and data that has been provided thus far. And yeah. So yeah, I think that's all that I want to say about that. And we don't have acne anywhere else, so that's it in the agenda. You're not saying anything, are you, David? Okay.
Just a brief comment. I mean, I've
Okay.
seen some of the so-called research upon which they're basing themselves, and these are like glossy 2-column brochures put out by some association, one in Texas, one in California. None of it is actual. It's meta. It's what they call a meta document, right? It's based on some other documents that you don't see, and then you have some charts summarizing in a very general way. I wouldn't call that a research paper. I mean, if a student submitted it to me, I would call it a brochure. And that's largely what they're basing. So when they talk about evidence, yeah, they have a brochure from some association in Texas, and they got one from somebody perhaps in California, and that's what they call research. But when I spoke with faculty at CCSU who do developmental math, they had actual data. They could tell me And I sat down with them, and believe me, they were not in favor of ACME. And I think Fred Latour is here, and he can probably talk to that. I think he was at the meeting that I attended with his colleague at my request. And that's actual research data, but
Right.
not these color brochures with the fancy graphs that are really like don't tell you anything.
Right. And over the past 6 months, we have produced so much of it. Developmental faculty have produced so much of it, and it's such excellent work. And it's so thoroughly researched, and it has not been acknowledged. It was not discussed at all at CCIC. And the comments made suggested that no such documents existed, because again, the lament was, why won't faculty read the studies and become convinced? Maybe it's some sort of resistance to internalizing it. So I see hands, but let me just, do you mind if I just show you one of these shiny brochures that David was mentioning? Because this isn't one of the shiny brochures. This was produced by this is our very own, apparently. This is us. Ooh, here we go. So we have just graphs with no sources. We have data from several different states kind of mashed together. It's like an impossible being, you know? Could you find all of these entities in a single place? Is it even logically coherent? Maybe not. But we have Tennessee, we have California, which, by the way, built its funding right into the legislation that created this modification. It's not information. And that is what is being provided. This is what the decision is based upon. Detailed policy decisions are being made on these picture graphs. So sorry. I saw hands. I know Ron, Lois. I feel like I missed someone else though. Go ahead, Ron.
So in terms of the proposal, right? Colleen, you made a good point that these are not co-requisites because the supports are not required, right? We have experience in this through PA 1240 at NBCC, right? Our initial plan was that we did is we had students in supplemental instruction. Basically the same thing, support for the college course, right? That supplemental instruction, okay, was free. The students paid nothing for it, right? And attendance wasn't taken. It was not part of the grade. It was completely optional. What we found is almost no students showed up for the supplemental support. They just didn't go. Okay, they skipped it. They said it has no bearing. They felt it had no bearing on their grade, so why should they go, right? So that's what we have in terms of our data. We have extensive data. We tracked student success rates in that, and we connected it to attendance, right? At these, and we found that if they did go, right, they performed fairly well. But the problem is almost none of them went. And so we paid to have these tutors on hand to provide supplemental support to these students, okay? And we were paying these students to stand in an empty room without students in them, okay? And then those students, right, failed the course because they didn't attend these sessions. And so what we did is we made it part of the grade for the course, and we also, right, in some circumstances, made it something that they had to pay for. So, and that dramatically made improvements, in terms of students' success rates on the college level course. But basically, what they've proposed is a recipe for students for an increase in the failure rate in these courses based upon extensive data that Naugatuck Valley Community College collected on our students. So that's what they've produced.
Lois?
I have, I'm in the middle of an email exchange with Bob Duff, who is my senator and is also the Senate Majority Leader. And the last email he sent me he quoted something from Acme that they had been sent. I'm sure it's one of these glossy brochures or this one that Kalina just showed us, telling me how wonderful Acme is with this brochure and how we have to really support our students in developmental because we're doing such a bad job of it right now. I think everybody needs to be really clear that this is the message that our legislators are getting, and they seem to be pushing it harder. And he was giving me quotes off of this stuff. So I just sent an email back to him earlier today, as a matter of fact, that was pretty strong, but we'll see. I don't think his mind is going to be changed, but I think we need to be aware that the BOR is now pressing this with the legislators.
So, yeah. So that's an aspect of the conversation that I didn't mention from ASA, and this takes it back to a point that Jen made very well, some time ago, which is simply that, part of the push is just we are failing these students so much now. We're failing them so, and I think that's also a sort of part of the reason that there is very little worry about dismissing the concerns of faculty, because it is, of course, faculty who have been failing our students, especially Black and Brown students, for so long. And what they're not really pointing out is that over the span of time that our Black and Brown population has grown, because they are pointing out specifically that we are underserving them, right? We are failing them. Over the span of time that population doubled, our budget has reduced to the point that I don't think we're really as operational as we should be, right? We're barely operational. That's why they're bombing us out of existence. And Jen has always pointed out that even the money that was provided for PA 1240 didn't get to the students. So there is this conversation that sort of implies that there is a sort of like attitudinal racism, or maybe just racial neglect happening at the level of our faculty, when in fact the conversation that we should be having is about the structural inequity that's sourced in the resources that are not available to our students. These inequities always start with resources. And it is the board's responsibility to get that. But what they have overseen is the defunding of our system. So the conversation is so inside out and backwards. And yes, of course, that is precisely the narrative. We have been failing our students. We have in particular been failing our Black and Brown students. We know that, but we need the resources to be able to do a lot of, but putting just any old thing. I think that Gretchen person from NCII, she said, anything is better, right? And it is that attitude that literally anything is better, even something that is almost incoherent. Like, we invested $2 million enrolling every single college in achieving the dream. And I believe one of the foundational sort of tenets of achieving the dream is that students don't do optional, which is exactly your experience, Ron, right? And, when in conversation with Ken Kluchnik, I pointed out that when they eliminated all standalone developmental courses in Florida, they had to reintroduce them because it didn't go so well. And Ken said, well, of course, but because they didn't introduce anything new, they didn't introduce like co-requisites or anything like that. But to a certain extent, neither have we if we're not requiring them and students don't do optional, right? So it's the same thing. It's like we're just abandoning them. So the whole conversation was that this is in the service of equity, one, and anti-racist, two. That term was used because it sort of puts the power back in the hands of the students. It empowers them to decide what supports they need, and they can opt out of any supports they choose. But what they can't do, and I think this point needs to be made, what they can't do is opt in to additional support or standalone courses. We've eliminated that option for them. So yeah, that conversation is particularly frustrating because again, we never had a conversation about what equity means. We never had a conversation about racism, anti-racism, structural racism, and what these terms mean. And they're being totally misused because any gap in service is being attributed to the attitudes and feelings of the member of faculty standing at the front of the room, when in fact it goes much deeper, and that's why we talk about structural, right? So it's confused, and I think unhelpful conversation, and ultimately blames the wrong people. Yes, Lois, go ahead.
I just wanted to put out there that in my response to Bob Duff, I quoted a couple of statements from Heather McGee in her book, The Sum of Us, and also from her interviews, noting the correlation in the reduction of funding for public higher ed as the population of Black and Brown students increased in public higher ed. So we'll see how he takes that.
At the last board meeting, he's at Central. I don't know how to say his last name. Is it Matt Cicel or Cicel? I don't know how to say his name, but he referred to that, the idea of like draining the pool, right? And he referred to Heather McGee's book, and he said, you know, it's kind of what we're doing. We're draining the pool.
Right.
I don't disagree.
Right.
Okay, so that the month-long Acme saga is done. We are stuck with that thing. But you know, well, whatever happens. Next is, report on the FAC conference. Does anybody else want to do this? Just chat about it. All I'll say is that I enjoyed it. I thought it was a great conversation. We made excellent connections that I think will be long lasting, just as we did, you know, the last time the FAC conference ran. And I think it's just wonderful for that alone. But there will be, would anybody else want to just, who was on the committee, want to talk about it just a little bit? I don't actually remember how many attendees there were.
I just want to say that there is a follow-up going out to the participants to an evaluation, if you will, so that we'll get more information from the participants. We had over 100 participants in the beginning of the meeting, and we ended up with just a little over 100 towards the end. So people did stay and come back for the second session, which I think is wonderful. I also want to commend, you know, Kalina and Eric and Mary Beth, because they did carry a lot of the planning behind the event. And for the most part, a lot of the comments were very much very happy with how it went. There's also a link attached to the evaluation about the continued reading segment that we have, right? So that's going to be a continuation. And in the evaluation, when you also asked participants to give us some idea of what they might want to see for the future. But overall, I think it was really well received. The participation was throughout the 17 campuses. And again, I think a program well done, according to the feedback and everyone else who participated. I think, you know, I think at first I think Kalina mentioned we were a little hesitant because we didn't know. It's the first time we've done it virtually. I think we did a great job in really highlighting that our union supported this year, even though central office did not support it at all this year. Although we did have some participants come in and out of the meeting from our central office.
I'll just add that the registration was around 235 people.
Yeah,
Amanda?
and I was just gonna add that we did record both the sessions. So if anybody didn't get a chance to attend or only was able to attend for part of the day, and you'd be interested in watching the panel discussions, we do have those links. I don't know, I know the links went out in the email to the participants, but I'm not sure if they're posted on that website, Kalina, or yeah, okay.
They
so
are.
then-
So the link right on the agenda will take you right to all of the conference stuff. Yeah, including the recording. Yeah, so please make use of those. And the sort of there's a desire to maybe follow up and keep that conversation going, right? So there's still a forum there for those who want to participate in either a reading group based on the conference content, or the find out more about bargaining for the common good or the New Deal for higher ed. So we'll probably start getting in touch with those folks as of next week. So if you were going to do that, please use that form now, and then we'll kind of shut it down. What's the other thing I wanted to mention? Oh, right. One of, I think, the major things that came out of that conversation was a sort of intertwining of, as Myrna pointed out, we were supported by our unions this year, and we kind of had lots of the conversation was about this sort of interplay between shared governance and sort of our existence as members of unions, right? So that conversation will continue to go forward. We have to figure out how that works. So hopefully we'll have, we have a new 4Cs president now, and hopefully we'll have a couple union presidents to come talk with us about how that sort of interplay happens soon. So I'll do that. All right, thanks, folks. Legislature. So there's a new bill modification, SB 850, has been modified to just have the bits that will make it through this session for sure. And they include training for regents and budget transparency. And the link to that is on the agenda also. And, there is still a desire, of course, for the substitute language for HB 6402 that we agreed on, and for the modified HB 6403 that has not changed. And I think you all have the sort of text of the what do you call them, the amendments that need to be added to them. So the thing that stands between that and us is simply perceived desire, right? Whether we, so just, you can keep pushing for that, but those bits, SB 850, training and budget transparency are expected to make it through fairly soon. And then there is that new, oh, sorry, go ahead, Ron.
The budget transparency, Kalina, what's to stop them from moving a lot of money to the Connecticut State Community College budget and then hiding it all there?
Nothing. And that's why they haven't resisted it for a second.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so the revenue package is fairly new, right? And actually I'll just open up the fact sheet on that so we can just have it in front of us. But this is interesting and under negotiations right now. And I think most of you will have received something to sort of send a note to the governor if you are in support of this. This is kind of led by Fonsara and Scanlon. But this is a way to sort of introduce progressive tax and get around the spending cap, which is being challenged right now. The constitutionality of being able to get around the spending cap in precisely this way, but it does seem that there is a way. So, again, all the challenges that we're facing in this system have to do with, the absence of revenue. So this is particularly important. And there is a rally on Monday at 5 p.m. starting at Bushnell Park under the arch and going up to the Capitol. That is a tax day march in support of this revenue package. that's happening on Monday. And again, it's just a matter of desire to push the negotiation. So, see, what else do I have? I think that's it for me in terms of report of the chair. I don't know. Is there anything I missed? I feel like each month so much happens between meetings. I can't even begin to remember. But I think that's it for me. So let's go to campus reopening. David, do you want to take that?
Okay, well, at the last regular meeting of the board, there was nothing on the agenda that I could perceive about campus reopening, and in particular, the question of mandatory vaccination, right, which I think is an issue that's been in the air for some time now. And so at the end of the ASA report, I brought that up. And I said it should be something sent to either one of the regular committees to work up a background statement and a proposal for a policy, or to some ad hoc committee if there wasn't an appropriate standing committee. There was a little bit of discussion. Rich Balducci had something to say, and so did Audrey Redfield, who I didn't know, but I believe she is the chair of the Student Advisory Committee. Is that right? And she was quite well-spoken and informed about the status of legislation with respect to removing the religious exemption. So about a week later, a little bit less than a week later, I did receive an email from Jane Gates asking that I constitute a working group on the question of mandatory vaccination with a specific charge, which I found reasonable. And so I agreed to do it because I brought it up at the meeting. I had made that suggestion. And as a result, we've now had 2 meetings of a group which consists of a couple of folks here, Fran and Paul, as well as a number of people I didn't know. I invited Audrey Redfield. I invited also Mike Russo, who is a director of counseling at CCSU, along with Bill Faraklis, who we all remember from having helped us about reopening in fall of 2020. So there's a total of 6 of us on this committee. We've met twice now, and there was consensus that we are in favor of proposing a requirement for all students, faculty, and staff returning in fall of 2021 to have been vaccinated, with the obvious exception of those who have medical exemptions. And what we are doing is, it's difficult to do this. We started the last week of classes, and now we're continuing in the exam week, and want to finish it by next week, at the end of next week, to submit it to the board, where it has to go to various committees, and so there's a whole procedure there. But I do believe we will have a document by the end of the week. That's the hope in any case. And what we're proposing to do is to look at it primarily from a moral, ethical point of view. The argument for mandatory vaccination is the protection of those who cannot be vaccinated, so the medical exemptions, and as well to contribute to the herd immunity, which is going to protect us all. We know that there are legal issues involved, and Paul, he's going to be looking into that, and we're going to provide a list of them. The fact that it is an emergency use authorization and not a final biological authorization, although we expect that Pfizer in particular, which has now applied for final authorization, will have that sometime in the summer. And that, of course, eliminates that particular problem. There are issues with respect to medical exemptions and the type of accommodation which would have to be provided for those who have it. But it appears that this is a very small number of people. And one of the issues that did come up, both Central and Southern passed resolutions in favor of mandatory vaccination. One of the issues that came up is that there has to be some balance between meeting the expectation of the students and also how the instructor is planning to teach a course. Obviously, an online course would be the best for those students. What kind of accommodation for an on-ground course, if their choice is not to come on campus, that needs to be worked out. But those are details in application. We're also looking at other institutions and systems which have adopted mandatory vaccination. That includes in Connecticut, Yale, in New Jersey, Rutgers, which is a public university, the CUNY system in New York, which is a public university, and the two California systems, both of which are public institutions. So we will then come up with recommendations with respect to a policy for mandated vaccination for the return to class in fall 2021. And I'd like to have, opinions of folks here as to what they feel about that issue.
Lois, and then Mary Beth.
Well, number one, David, in New York, the SUNY system is also doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And number two, I think it takes on even more urgency now that the CDC has come out and said people who are vaccinated don't have to wear masks indoors anywhere. And how do we know who's vaccinated and who isn't? And especially if you're sitting, you're in a classroom with the same students for a couple of hours, and none of them have masks on, and you don't know if they've been vaccinated or not. That all can be a little bit scary. So I think it certainly takes on new urgency with the CDC, and now the state of Connecticut, as of May 19, is not going to require masks indoors anymore.
I agree with exactly, I was going to say almost exactly what Lois just said, that there's certainly other institutions that are requiring it. I'm even hearing chatter that like K-12 schools are going to require it for the populations that are, for the age groups that it's approved for at particular stages. I've already gotten, emails about camps for my kids that you can go to this camp if you proof of vaccination. So I think that it's going in that direction, and it seems like it makes sense. Again, like Lois said, particularly with now, not being able to require that students have a mask on when they're in the classroom, and no way to know if they're vaccinated or not. It seems like it's a logical thing to do, in my opinion. So I would agree.
Yeah, the tricky point is going to be implementation and enforcement. But I mean, that's something we're going to look at next week. And at this point, we've discussed it in sort of a general way. But that may also be up to each institution. And there's obviously differences between the community colleges and the universities. The most evident one being the residences. That's fairly easy to mandate. And we know, for example, that students who go into residence are already required to have their MMR and the encephalitis as well vaccines. Students who want to use sports facilities, go into the student center, use the gym, use the library. Those are all optional activities, distinct from participation in the classroom. And then in the classroom, the issues that Lois brought up, I think, are important, and we're going to definitely address that. So if I may mention, the format for the report that was requested of me was current emergency use authorization impacts, number one, timetable for biologic license approval, that's the BLA, the permanent approval, and impacts. 3, current Connecticut state law and limitations on vaccinations. As you know, the state just recently, the legislature passed and the governor approved, removing the religious exemption for school vaccinations. And that was just 10 days ago. Best practice for assuring that all faculty, staff, and students are vaccinated. That's the implementation aspect. Treatment of medical and religious exemptions. Well, religious exemptions, that's dealt with. We're going to exclude those on the basis of analogy to the legislation just passed. And consequences for failure to vaccinate. So we're going to add to that a background stating the various facts relevant, and that's pretty typical of policies presented to the board, that there's a background of facts and figures. And secondly, we're going to focus as well, as I said, on the moral ethical imperative here, as well as the medical applications. So I will have that report, which I can circulate to members of the FAC for your opinions. It wouldn't be a document of the FAC, but it would be something I would seek your input on probably by the end of next week. And so I'll send it around just for the purposes of consultation. And I'll be interested in individual comments and remarks. I hope to have the whole thing submitted to the interim president of the board, of the system office rather, by a week Monday. That is to say, not this coming Monday, but the following Monday, if possible, say within 10 days.
Well, David, I want to thank you and Audrey for so clearly sort of pushing the point and making it happen, and then also for all your work on it. And and Audrey, I believe, is Audrey Nielsen now. But yes, very clear on the issues and so on. So yeah, thank
She
you.
was a big surprise. I didn't know her before. She's studying to be an investigative journalist, and
Yeah.
boy, does she have a command of facts and an ability to express them clearly. I sometimes wish I spoke as clearly.
Yes, impressive. So this should be a more general discussion of campus reopening, but it appears to me that most of us are still unclear on the details in our own colleges and universities, and much of what we're hearing is speculation, and that we would get more clear information after May 19th. Does that sound right? So I think at the moment, maybe if there are any particular points that need to be, points of concern or information that we need, what I'm hoping is that maybe if there is still a lack of clarity after, it is May 19th, right? That's the date after the governor says what he has to say, then we'll have an official. The concern is that it's like there's a June 1st date for a lot of people. So we're not going to really have time to address that. So, if there are urgent concerns, we could talk about that, but hopefully we could get information straight from CEOs and so on so that we can actually talk about what's happening. Because I think one of the issues with campus reopening is that we're not getting full information. I think things are happening with staff that many of us don't actually know are happening. So, any of that would be great. And go ahead, Mary Beth.
Yeah, I was just going to, make a comment related to one of the staff members at my school that I spoke to, and her just very realistic concern in that, she has not been utilizing daycare for her young daughter because of her, her spouse's work schedule. Her spouse doesn't go to work till 2. She only works till 4. The child takes a nap in the afternoon. They've been making it work, and now she's finding out, in a way that seems very rushed and unclear, that she may or may not need, to quickly find a daycare place. So I think that's like a realistic thing that may not be, people may not realize that things like that take time. And so it just seems like, a rush. And she's like, I'm, clearly doing my job, fine right now. There's not going to be really students on campus for me to advise, in person as very much during the summer. So anyway, that's just kind of like an aside of just the reality of sort of how this is affecting some of our colleagues that are being told they have to come back very quickly.
Yeah, agreed. It is very, very quick. And I hope that the fact that we can't have the final decision until very late in May will mean that that date gets pushed back. And maybe that's an informal conversation that we could have, in case somehow that hasn't been, this hasn't been brought up before. But, all right. So any other, anything else before we get off of this topic and then hopefully come back to it with full information next month? Okay. All right. HERF revisited. Ron, do you want to? I didn't ask you ahead of time, but is this something that you want to chat about, or it seemed like we needed to revisit it, but where we left off last time. Go ahead.
Where we left off last time was that we were going to, or somebody, I don't know who volunteered, but was going to check into whether or not it was a violation of the federal law for the board to claim the funds that were allocated to individual independently accredited institutions, because the money was allocated to each college individually, and yet the BOR pulled the money together and doled it out to the community college in like a teaspoon and saved the rest for guided pathways and other students first initiatives. So I don't know. Lois has her hand up, so I will cede to Lois.
I sent an email to Blumenthal, to Murphy, and to Jim Himes. What I received back was, thank you for reaching out to me. And I've received nothing since then. And I sent it over a week ago.
And
So I will resend it. I'll resend it. If
I
I
was
hear nothing.
told that Rosa DeLauro would be a good one to speak to.
She's not my rep,
Yeah.
Mhm.
so I don't know if she'd listen to me. Jim Himes is my rep. Jim Himes usually responds pretty quickly, so I'm kind of surprised about this. I'll send it again. I'll just send it again, see what happens.
Yeah, I think the difficulty, I mean, maybe you want to speak to this, David, that made it a little bit harder to kind of push the point, was that it seems that, let me know if I'm getting this right. The decisions are going to be made at the system office, and then there will be a purposeful, they will make sure that once the priorities have been set by system office, the exact amounts that were allocated to each college will be sent to those colleges with the priorities that have already been placed on them. So the decision making really doesn't happen at the colleges, other than the 10 million that's been given to all 12 colleges for their own initiative. But in terms of the actual thing, hijacking of the dollars, it's not something that we can necessarily say, because on paper they will get every dollar they're allowed. It's just that none of us at the colleges get to determine what's necessary. And we know that we have like staff who are overworked and definitely know what's necessary. But yeah, is that right, David? Uh-huh.
I heard that one of the biggest expenses had to do with a data warehouse for Banner, which obviously can't be doled out by college, because that's shared services. So if any money goes into shared services, how the heck do you account for it as specific to an individual college? You can't. So they have planned to spend this money on shared services. So that seems to be a violation of federal law. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so that's why I was asking for clarification.
Right, and I agree with Ron, and Ben Barnes himself said at the last meeting that they were looking at using a lot of this money for guided pathways, which is also something they own, not something we own. So that's not coming back to us either. So I think we need to clarify what's happening. I also sent an email based for our planning and budget committee. I sent an email to our CEO asking for an outline of how this funding is working for our college in particular, what this process is as far as her understanding. But as I said, I will reach out to Blumenthal and Murphy and Himes again. I'm beginning to hate all legislators.
If I can just add something, I think Kalina has it right. So it's the distinction between money sent and money credited to the institution. So for example, let's take and I'm not defending this, but this is how they're going to do it, because it's a spreadsheet accounting. So supposing that shared services spends $50 million, and that Middlesex represents by student population 10% of the total. Well, then 10% of that shared services will be credited to, right? And I think that strikes me as what they plan to do. Whether
that strikes me as illegal.
I'm not defending the legality. I'm just discussing the way in which they plan to do it.
I hear what you're saying, David, but I think that they were, again, I'm not a lawyer either. I don't know this, but I think they're playing a little bit with fire, because this funding was allocated to us by our OPEID numbers. Each college and university in the country by
And
our
the CEOs
OPEID numbers.
The CEOs are accountable for it. The CEOs, according to what I read, the CEOs are accountable for this money, not the system office. The CEOs, the campus, the chief academic officer at the college is responsible for the for this money. And so, I'm assuming they're going to strong arm these CEOs into signing it away. But that again, this is dishonest and unethical. Besides perhaps being illegal, but it's certainly dishonest and unethical. And that needs to be noted in the public record.
Do we have a lawyer in the House? I see Paul is here. I don't want to put him on the spot because it's probably far from his something that he researched.
Yes, we do, but I'm not to make a comment on.
Yeah, we're putting you on the spot.
I don't know anything relative to it.
But
It all boils down to the statute.
Actually, I just looked at it. I sent the email on May 9.
well, we should follow up on this.
Okay. So we will find out. Now that we know how it's being done, we'll follow up and see if we can get more information on, whether it's legal, and certainly we know that it's not an excellent way to do it. All right. Are we comfortable leaving it there for now and continuing to follow up? Okay. All right. Barbara, I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here. I didn't ask you whether you wanted to leave this part, but I know that our recent consolidated college policies and curriculum was something that you might have wanted to talk about. Do you want to start us off?
I wanted in particular to just say that, can you hear me okay?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, good. At Housatonic, the Senate is being asked to vote Tuesday on the shared governance policy of the system. And I wanted to ask the group where we stand on that, where that if other campuses are being asked to do the same thing, just what I feel out of touch with what happened after the big mess we had before with the shared governance issue. So can people help with that?
Ron, Fran, Lois.
Yeah. The first I knew of it was when it came out in the agenda for this meeting. I had no idea that was something we were supposed to be voting on. It was never presented to our college. I didn't know about it. And it's not in our agenda for our next meeting, so I guess we won't be voting. But it's just another example of the poor communication that's coming from the system office on matters of incredible importance. And so it's just very sad that they've given us a deadline to vote on something that they've never shared with us until I just saw it with in Kalina's agenda.
Fran, and I'll just say that I know that it went to Manchester Senate. I'm not sure if it even came to Gateway. We wouldn't, I don't know. But yeah, go ahead, Fred.
Yeah, it just came to Tunxus yesterday or the day before, same thing, last minute, and Mike Stefanowicz is coming to our governance meeting. We're supposed to be voting on this next Thursday. So again, there'll be no time for faculty to look at this. They're doing finals and other things. It's a long and complicated document. And of course, the bigger problem for those of us who served on this committee, the whole process was illegitimate from the start. Lauren Doniger's made this point over and over and over again. This governance structure should have been built before there was any talk of curriculum consolidation. There should have been a system-wide one college governance structure, particularly for the new community college they're trying to build. And they have no intention of doing that. So I'm going to be vociferous in my opposition to this as simply another illegitimate process, creating an illegitimate body that we should have nothing to do with.
Good, Lois.
I got this, I don't know, I don't remember how I got it. I got it a couple of weeks ago, but I'm going to we have a Senate meeting on Tuesday as well, and I'm going to write something up for them to vote on. I probably will take the document that I wrote for in November for our December meeting and, maybe revise it a little bit, use the same document because it was very much against what's going on. And I'm sure this new document hasn't changed much of anything. And as far as Housatonic was, Barbara, Saulo reached out to me and asked me if there was any kind of written documentation since I put out the November document on shared governance. So I shared with him the one that I had written and our Senate voted on last December, and said to him that I would be writing something else for our Senate to vote on Tuesday. The date for doesn't matter, but the date for response is like May 21st or something or other. So anyway, so I said I would share whatever I wrote with Saulo, and he could, edit or do whatever he wanted with it, and he was fine with that. So I'm planning on doing it either tomorrow or Sunday because I have nothing better to do over the weekend anyway. So.
Oh, that's helpful. Yeah, Sal had asked me to come to the meeting to help respond, so I wanted to know what to say, but he'll have yours as a model, and that's good.
Okay.
Could you send around a copy of that document? I
Which one is
remember
it?
having read something, and just correct me if it's changed, that they were proposing something like a college-wide senate, which would be based on representation from each campus, where faculty, in fact, would be in a minority, and then a sort of curriculum committee based on 6 sort of super areas with 3 people from each, but no 2 people from the same discipline, perhaps anywhere. And it was obviously discordant between the curriculum structure and the the Senate structure. But I haven't seen anything since then, so I may be out of date.
I can send it out. It's the curriculum Congress, as they call it, does not report to the Senate.
Oh, that's it.
It's linked on the agenda under number 7.
Oh.
Yeah. But yeah, they're parallel to each other.
Mm-hmm.
That's even more out of
Lois,
sync.
could you also send all of us your document about it?
Sure. Do you want the one I wrote in December, the one that was voted on in last December?
Well, or maybe if you're going to revise it, maybe the revised one, but yes.
Okay, I can send both.
Yeah, and I guess it's no secret that so I attended the Manchester Senate meeting and provided the clip of when Levinson and Rook attended our meeting, and we eventually kind of got to the point where it was we pretty much established that it was parking areas and smoking areas that our college senates would actually, because there was some confusion about that, like, will we lose control over our college? What level of governance does this actually represent? So provided that. I mean, I have to say I have trouble bothering with the details of it, because either way, I mean, it's for a giant college where we will not have any meaningful control at any one of the 12 locations where students are. So You know, how exactly that will be accomplished to me is just, there are many different awful ways to do a thing. Which one happens to be it? You know, there are definitely imbalances. Also, I think one of the concerns that definitely Manchester pointed out was that small colleges could outvote large colleges really easily. You know, like, so student representation. You know, we didn't have a voting structure that represented numbers of students or sizes of campuses or anything like that.
Yeah, Colleen, I agree with you, and I don't think I'm going to get into those deeds. I think I'd have to go back and read what I wrote last December and November, but I'm sure it was generalities, and I'm going to stick with that because the idiocy of everything is just, I don't want to get into, I just don't want to get into it because I don't care.
Yeah, I don't have the brain space. Like, there are things that matter, and that one does not.
Right.
Either way,
Exactly.
we have no power.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
Can I just say something relative to that? I solicited nominations. Our governance committee elections coming up here in the next couple of weeks. And I was surprised because I've been doing nominations and elections for years as the chair of the Senate. And very few people nominated for governance committees of the Senate, College Affairs, Faculty, Staff, Student Development, Planning and Review. And I talked to Carmen and Seth about it. And we're of the mind that as people they're really not going to have any say anymore. So I'm going to distribute the ballot and try to solicit some more nominations for these elected committees under governance. But I think that's one of the snowball effects of this. To your point, Kalina, is, and as we've all talked about before, the little amount of input that we're going to be allowed to have is now resonating in the fact that in our college anyway, the amount of people self-nominated or nominated others is very few relative to what hasn't been in the last several years or ever.
Well, it's not going to be an easy time, right? The next couple of years are not going to be easy. We're having the same issue at Gateway. We just can't get anyone to serve on the as the head of our faculty staff council. Nobody's particularly interested. So similar. All right. Shall we move on? And Barbara, did we address the main thing? Was it about the details or was it about the endorsement? Because I know there are also questions about that, right? Like, what a lot of colleges are really asking to get a clear answer on what endorsement means. And I included that clip under number 7 on our agenda. It's a clip directly to the ASA meeting in May of 2020. Because if you were on the Shared Governance Committee, you'll know that we spent about 2 years constantly asking the question, what is the TAP process? Can you please describe the TAP process? You know, what are the parameters of the TAP process? Is there a level of participation? Is there a level of endorsement? What are your commitments? What will you do if everybody rejects a proposal, or if 2/3 reject a proposal, or, you know, like, what is your threshold? And we never quite got an answer until the May 2020 ASA meeting, where it was made clear that the TAP process means that there is no level of participation, nor is there any level of endorsement necessary for any curricular product to just move all the way through to the board and become policy. So it is, in effect, providing these things to our colleges, and this is probably why we're in this situation where some of us have it and some of us don't, and it doesn't really matter. Providing it really functions no more than providing it as an information item, because what action we take has no particular bearing on what path it takes, right? So there's a clip there if anybody is trying to figure out what happens if we vote, you know, we don't want to hold it up by not voting for it, right? it is clear that you could go to sleep and everything would move forward just fine. So if you need it, there it is. It's timestamped, so it goes straight to that section.
Well, I think that when we started to realize that the TAP process had nothing to do with anything that we had to say about it on our campuses, that was like a warning of what was coming. It was very vague, you know, there was all this talk of faculty input, but it all meant nothing. And that's what this is, and it's horrible, and I think we should discuss it with the new president of the whole system. I think it's really the heart of the matter about anything in the future. If we have no way for the campus people to have a voice that's serious, and I don't know if it's happening all over the country, that the faculty are being completely left out of everything more and more. But if so, it's terrible. But certainly, you've answered my questions. It's just awful.
So Barbara, about it happening across the country, I am struck constantly by listening to conversations that happen with folks like Jen Middlestat, Sherry Wolf, you know, who were at our conference at Stephen Breyer. Why did his name just fly out of my head? The Great Mistake from 2 years ago. How did I just forget his name? It'll come to me. But the point is, it is very interesting to me that every now and then you have a conversation with someone who knows exactly what you are going through without you ever having told them what is happening. And when you look at all these different consulting groups and so on across Chris Newfield, yes, thank you, Mary Beth. I don't know why his name flew out. So yeah, there are all these sort of consulting, you know, firms that are across the country. And one of the things that really struck me, and I got this straight from Jen Middlestat, was to talk about the role of debt in our system, and the fact that because state funding has reduced so significantly, the cost of debt service is significant these days, and your credit rating is huge, right? You know, I think we just reported that our interest rate went down significantly, and it's saving us about $1 million a year because of different moves we made, and that could happen in the future. One of the ways to improve your credit rating, as in, you know, for anyone, is to make sure that your recurring costs can be easily unloaded, right? So that you can pay your debt. So we are, as, you know, staff, you know, their personnel costs are the largest costs that they bear. And the more unloadable we are, even in principle, even if there's no plan to get rid of us, the easier it is to unload us as costs. The higher your rating is, the lower your debt service costs, and so on. So I think there is even if that's not specifically what's driving our system, a sort of best practices across boards across the nation that use that kind of logic in the background. What is the best structure? It is the one that makes your staff most disposable. And if you look at this consolidation, that is precisely what it's designed to do. Make the majority of us maximally disposable, concentrate power in the hands of just a few, so that it takes like 2 people to decide we're going to outsource all of IT, right? And that's it, right? Or it takes 2 people to make these sorts of decisions. And I believe that culture, whether that's the actual causal chain or the conscious decision that's happening in our system, that culture is becoming standard nationally, and we are living in it right now. That's my feeling. That's my assessment of the thing. So we are definitely not alone.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
No.
And as a general comment, you know, there was a slogan put forward by a former president which has some resonance in the country, which is that government isn't the solution, it's the problem. And I think in some minds, the idea has been developed that faculty aren't the solution, they're the problems. And they're the problems in terms of the percentage of overall budget which goes to salaries. It's the overhead costs as well, the fringe benefits, and of course it's the pension obligations, that on a financial level. But what we see, I think, developed kind of unconsciously and spontaneously in Students First is this ideology that faculty are the obstacle. That it's not that, you know, a university is a special kind of organization. It's not an army where the generals decide what the privates do. And even in those armies where the generals did decide what the privates do, as Saddam Hussein found out, that doesn't make for a very flexible army, and it's not one that's going to win. The U.S. Army functions actually with a fair amount of autonomy for operational groups. But that's beside the point. But the university is a special kind of institution. The colleges, I'm including colleges as well, especially in the public sector. And those institutions march on the basis of their faculty, and in particular the full-time faculty, along with the support staff who aid and assist the faculty. And that even includes the administrators who we need to look after budget and so forth. I mean, without administrations at Central, we'd have a 100-person philosophy department. Somebody has to restrain us. I understand that. But just as we have to take into account that role of administration with respect to budget, with proper information to us and consultation as well, they have to begin to understand. And that's going to be a big effort for them, especially at the system office, where they are cut off from what goes on in the classrooms, and where this whole Students First has evolved into, I don't want to put it as bluntly as this, but some people have mentioned it, kind of like a hostile takeover. If you look, we were talking about Terrence Chang, who's director of a Stanford campus. Well, there is a central university there, UConn, at Storrs. The equivalent for what's going on in the community colleges is that there is no one central community college. There are at least 3 of them which are fairly large, and they come in middle and small sizes. What is becoming the hub is the system office. But that's the group which is the most cut off from what's going on in the classroom. And we see this over and over again in the ACB thing and whatever else that we've been discussing in terms of particular examples of efforts by the system office to control that area, which is essentially under the control of faculty, namely curriculum and pedagogy. It's one thing for them to, on the basis of research they do, to say, hey, we've got a problem here. And it seems that probably we're in agreement what some of the problems are. It's a very different thing for them to say, well, you're the obstacle to solving this problem, or you're the source of the problem, so we're going to take over. And that's almost like the hostile takeover. I think we need to clarify that point and make it really clear. Not just the integrity and autonomy of the institution's part of CSCU, that includes the independent accreditations of the community colleges, but the faculty control over curriculum and pedagogy, and for that matter, shared services, but only on the basis of actual mutual benefit and mutual agreement of institutions and learning.
Hear, hear.
Mm-hmm. And I think Fran pointed out also, I just want to point out that my little hypothesis there about the disposability of faculty, you see it also in the language used with the universities right now, the whole sort of lean and nimble kind of language, right? That idea of being able to move that way, it's fairly consistent. I wonder, and I don't know what you all think of this, I wonder how much of the burden of, like, just psychologically, our salary and fringe costs are always inflated because our legacy costs are baked in. And I wonder how much of that affects us. Like, it would be nice to just separate them out sometimes so that we don't look as much of as heavy as we are. All right. Shall we move on? Okay. I am, let's see, what is it? It's, oh, FAC BOR joint meeting. Okay, so, yeah. Is someone jumping in here? Okay. So the FAC BOR joint meeting, I think the last time that we spoke, the plan had been for the joint meeting to be on June 24th. That has been modified. And the idea was we're going to have a new president of the system. We might want to have a conversation with that person first, get a sense of them. Well, now we know it's him. And in addition, we wanted to get some answers from them, and the turnaround would be really quick. So now the idea is that if we could finalize the kinds of questions that we want answered, because remember, I think the memo to Fleury was we need to at least have a shared sense of reality if we're going to move forward together, right? We may not agree ultimately, but at least we can like come from the same set of facts, even if we have slightly different values, right? So the idea is that if we can finalize a set of questions today, approve them, we could send them off to system office so that they can send us answers in writing by June 4th. That gives us a week to review them, think about them, and have our own responses or follow-up questions or whatever it might be by the time we meet again on June 11th, I believe it is. Then David and I will have a chance to meet with our new president in July at some point. And then we will have a preliminary discussion about what our agenda can be in July. At the July FAC meeting, we will finalize an agenda for the joint, or at least our request for agenda items for the joint FAC BOR meeting, and our joint meeting will be in August. That's where we are. Go ahead, Lois.
All right. We know, I'm sure, I hope we know that in many cases, these people are going to come back with made up fictional responses to these questions. And so we're going to be going back to challenging and asking them for specifics. We know where this all is going to go. I mean, I will go back to my issues with the research they did on the, whatever it was, CSCC 101 or whatever the hell that is, and how they twisted Laura Rendon's research to suit their needs. And they're doing it all the time. So, you know, they're going to continue to do that. I can't imagine why they wouldn't continue to do that. So the responses to these questions are going to be, or to many of these questions, are going to be fictional, out and out lies, let's say. And so how would we respond to that? For example, number 5, just for an example, you project a 25% increase in enrollment due to guided pathways advising and a resulting $20 to $25 million annually because of retention. Is that correct? So they come back and say yes.
Mm-hmm.
Next.
But then it asks for, am I still unmuted? Yeah. Then it asks for the calculation, right?
Okay, so they make up these calculations to fit their numbers.
Right.
In what?
I mean, that's what we've been dealing with for years, right?
No, I understand that, but I'm not understanding what is our end game here?
You know, I don't know, but here's the deal. We are at an impasse. This is not an ideal situation in the sense that we're stalled on tap. God knows, and that's a question on here, right? How much have we invested time, energy, effort, focus, the creation of a 17 institution system, money, in this idea that transfer articulation will facilitate our students through all the way to a bachelor's degree. But we're stalled, we're stuck, partly because nobody wants to touch it, because nobody trusts anybody with their work at this point. And so honestly, I might be as pessimistic as you. I will not allow myself to know whether I am or am not. But I do think you cannot have any relationship without honesty and communication. We don't have that right now. At least we are making an effort.
I understand.
And if we don't get it, it will be documented that we don't get it. And I also think that these questions are valuable in themselves.
I understand. I fully understand all of that, but we have seen firsthand and heard firsthand how they handle this stuff.
Yep.
So are we actually expecting to have a joint meeting in August with these people?
I mean, it depends on what the answers are. I mean, we have an opportunity to respond, and then we have an opportunity to discuss. And, you know, I find it particularly distressing that after an extended discussion about the actual real effects of a policy on, let's say, poorer or on students of color, right? That someone could just flippantly make a claim, but it's anti-racist though, as if the discussion about the actual real material effects of this policy is somehow divorced from its anti-racism, which is just filled with the warm and fuzzy feelings in one's heart when one enunciates those words, right? It is.
Well, it's just like,
insane,
you know,
but
if I use the word equity enough, everybody will love me.
Exactly. I am tired of those words. I don't think we should even
Me
bother
too.
to use. I wrote a
Me
letter
too.
to the ASA saying this is what equity usually means. Let's try to agree on this definition. It was not necessarily successful. I think we should stop using, you know, the trendy words of the moment and talk about, you know, and quantify and use specifics. So this is an attempt to do that. I don't think that anyone should be making any claims about equity, anti-racism, or any of these things until these questions can be answered. I suspect that none of this information is readily at hand at the moment. So these are the first 4 questions. You know, these are the rest. I hope you all took a look at it. The ones that were added since they were sent this morning are these. Provide a representation of the administrative structure from deans to CSCU president with 12 colleges, and then provide that representation of the administrative structure after consolidation, and then detail the cost of each. Because this is still being sold as something that reduces administrative costs. So, I mean, I'm sure that's not what they mean. The cost, it's not the cost of administration, it's the administrative cost and the shared services or whatever. But still, these costs are significant. And then provide an example of a successful implementation of a developmental education reform that simultaneously eliminated developmental education entirely and made all supports for gateway courses optional. If such an example exists, please provide details of its funding plan. That'll be cleaned up to be a little bit more polite. And then under the current plan, when the consolidation is complete, what operating functions of CSCC are expected to be controlled by the system office? Which ones will be overseen by the system of the president of the CSCC? If the consolidation is completed, CSCC will be among the largest community colleges in the country. Please identify other large community colleges in the United States where a college president does not report directly to a governing board. Why have the state university presidents been given authority to determine HERF fund expenditures allotted to their institutions by the federal government, but the community college CEOs have not? Do you lack confidence in the CEOs you hired? Okay, so that's 14 questions. We've looked at the last.
I think you should leave in that statement, please cite sources in a way that would meet the standards of an English 101 paper.
Okay. Do we need to go through them individually, or have you all reviewed them enough? Right. We're going to stipulate some definitions because we know that savings due to consolidation and costs due to consolidation have been defined in very inconsistent ways, and ways that are not particularly helpful to sort of reveal the actual cost. All of these questions, with the exception of the question about TAP, which is related, are related to the community colleges. So if there, I would love there to be other things that we could do and talk about. It's unfortunate that we have been stuck in this loop of consolidation for this long. So, if there are any suggestions, I hope you're all looking at it. Right. Oh, actually, did I give you the link to the more complete version? Let me make sure that you all have it right now. I know you have the one that's in your email. So it's in the chat, so you can look at that. Go ahead, Fran.
Yeah, it may be in there, Kalina, but projected savings too. I'm intrigued by Carrie Kelly's presentation at the joint forum back on March 11th. I'm still trying to figure out those numbers that she came up with. And she used terms such as cumulative savings and recurring savings. So I don't know if we need a separate item for that. Defining those terms. What are recurrent savings, cumulative savings, and where are they? Where are they projected to be? One other small item under 6, the second footnote, you could put that has FOIA'd 3 times. I wrote all 3. So it's actually, there have been 3 FOIA requests to try to get that information. The first one was over a year ago.
Well, what are they telling you, Fran?
Well, what I've learned is, and this is all semantics meant to shield information from us, obviously. The first, I was told that nobody chaired or these work groups working on curriculum consolidation. So there were no chairs. The second, there were no minutes. Now, I think the way they got around that is there were no minutes because these are work groups, not committees. So work groups, I guess, don't have to keep minutes. That's the argument. So nobody chaired these curricular work groups, and there are no minutes. So if there are no minutes, we have no idea who was there, what they decided, how they decided it, how many times they met, or when they met.
But these people were paid, so they have to have a record of that.
Yeah. So this is dubious, to say the least. Still waiting for a reply on the third FOIA.
If I could jump in here just with a general comment, I think the questions are quite interesting and they're largely factual based. And I understand Kalina's point that we want to have some common facts, right? We all know the expression, we may have divergent views, but we have to have, some common basis in the reality of shared facts. The problem with spreadsheets are, we typically see the top level spreadsheet, and that's been aggregated from various lower level spreadsheets where you see more of the mechanics of what's going on. When we have requested, more detail, for example, the request I made to have a more specific list of how many people are going into shared services and from which campus are they coming. They have provided that, but we have to know to ask the right question, right? And that's I think what Kalina is trying to get at in the questions that she has proposed. More generally, I mean, the issue that we face is the scope and the pace of Students First, and the effort by the system office, as facilitated by its approval at the Board of Regents, to have a scope for Systems First which is way too large, and to have a pace which is way too fast. And all of the problems that we're seeing are largely a result of that. For example, transfer articulations, which had begun on what seemed to be a positive footing, have been left aside for the last 2 years. The documents are way out of date. They don't take into account the changes that have happened at the universities. I mentioned before, I looked at one for transfer from one of the community colleges to CCSU, and it referenced a course in philosophy which we eliminated 25 years ago. That's do one or two things properly, and what they are trying to do is do everything all at once, and then they find out, of course, that we point out that that's too great a scope, too fast a pace, and it's not going to get the result that they, or we for that matter, want. And I think one of the things that we need to point out at this joint meeting is precisely that problem. If they want to do transfer articulation, and that seems to be an important thing, let's actually do that. If there's going to be some pilots for guided pathways, let's see what the results are. Let's stop, however, this precipitous curriculum alignment, right, which is, as they say, a bridge too far. Those are some of the questions that I would like to put to them, where we indicate some things, I think it's perfectly legitimate for a system office, or for that matter, even the board, although probably more the system office, to identify certain problems. A problem identified back in 2010, but I participated at a meeting on this in 2006, was transfer between the universities and more largely between the community colleges and universities. That's where the transfer articulation is supposed to occur. Let's do that properly, instead of extending it to 10 other things, mixing them all up at the same time, and then concluding that faculty are the obstacles, and let's go ahead and get system office proposals which insinuate themselves into areas of faculty competence approved by the board. Hence the micromanaging for College and Student Success 101, for ACME, and even for that matter, the budget amendment that was done in December without first going through the Finance Committee. That's the kind of conversation I'd like to have with them. So, we need to point out where are shared concerns and where we identify the mistakes, serious as they are, which are currently being committed, and then move forward from there. I think Kalina's questions are good in the sense that we should have this data in advance. I don't expect that we would spend the meeting fussing over one particular item or another. If we see that there is a number which is not properly explained, we have the rest of the summer to get that explanation, so that when we meet in August, that has been, at least in principle, cleared up.
So, yeah, I mean, that's the idea, right? So number 5, is that enough for these projections? You project, this. So this is about the enrollment and the revenue due to enrollment.
Yeah.
Is that enough, or have we missed anything? And then I'll scroll up, because I think I was asking you before, Fran, and I was not unmuted. So savings due to consolidation, here is the question. And I assume, like, if it's itemized, then we'd get some of that, the 2 terms that you mentioned, but your hand is up, go ahead.
Yeah, I did send you something in the chat.
Okay.
Maybe it's covered here, but you could also simply do the same thing, projected savings. So in other words, savings to date, maybe that's the first question. And then the second is the projected savings for the next, whatever, 3, 4, 5 fiscal years. And then just kind of use the same set of questions. You know, how much do they project? And share calculations and itemize.
Okay, we'll add that. I see.
You know,
it.
one other suggestion too is we can't possibly think of every question here. We don't know how they're going to respond, except we kind of do. I agree, Lois. But Ben Barnes.
I can write the responses for you.
What I've seen Ben Barnes in a lot of meetings. Ben Barnes is actually reasonably forthcoming with useful information. And, you know, if we have specific questions, I'd strongly suggest that we invite him back to a future meeting and ask him those specific questions.
I agree. He answers questions. He does. Yeah. Okay, so you all have access to that final list. We're including the additional questions that Fran put in the chat with the modifications to sort of make it look like the same form as the other ones, right? So you share calculations and itemize. How much do you project? How do you define? In fact, that's fine. That should be enough. I think we should now request any additional questions that may have occurred to you in the last day to add to this. Because we are going to decide on the agenda down the line, and this helps inform that agenda, and then vote on the final list. So are there any other questions we want to add, or is there any request for information on there that you're uncomfortable with?
Could I just ask that question 5 be reworded somewhat? It doesn't exactly make complete sense the way it's worded right now.
I'm looking at it. Okay, could you suggest and I'll modify?
Well, all right. So you project a 25% increase in enrollment due to guided pathways, advising and a resulting what increase in tuition? What's the 25 million annually represent? What is that?
Yeah, it'll be tuition.
By 2025 because of this retention, but you're actually talking about increased enrollments. Are you?
Yeah, it is. I should say retention. They call it enrollment, but I believe it's retention.
Well, no, I think you're right in the beginning. I think it's enrollment. So I think what you should be saying at the end is because of this increased enrollment and increased retention.
Okay, increased. Okay. So now it reads, you project 25% increase in enrollment due to guided pathways advising and a resulting 20-25 million annually by 2025 because of this increased enrollment and retention. Is that good enough?
No, what is the 20-25 million? Is it an increase in tuition funding that we're getting, or increase in tuition that they're going to be getting, or what is that 20 to 25 million?
It's from tuition. It's from tuition. It's from.
Okay, then you need to put that in there.
About 1 in 8 students, was that it? Will take an extra 3-credit course. I think something like that. 1 in 8, 1 in 6, something like that.
Kalina, it's Pam. Could you maybe consider using the word revenue to include tuition fees and other services and costs for revenue for other services?
Okay, so just say 20 to 25 million in revenue.
In revenue,
Increase
in revenue, right? And that way, we're not just giving you the line item for tuition. It's a total picture of the increase in revenue.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Hi, Pam. Thanks.
Hi.
All right. Other than that, are we comfortable with the list?
Do you have any questions about alignment? Or are those, I mean, it seems that very few programs have even made proposals for alignment. The question I would have is why they consider this so important. and how this is supposed to benefit students by having the same courses without the distinctions that individual colleges, based on the competency in the areas of specialization, the faculty have been able to provide. Now, that's not a quantitative question; it's more a qualitative one.
Right.
But
And
that's
you
part of
notice
the accreditation process. You can't, if you want a single accredited college, you have to align all your programs. Nothing can be different.
But let them give that answer.
Yeah. So what is the value? So
Right.
so here was the thing I was thinking, right? In writing, what we want is facts, figures, justifications, calculations.
Mhm.
When we are able to do some back and forth with being informed by this data, I think that's when we should ask value questions, right? Like, why do we even, like, yes, we need it for single accreditation, but why do we need single accreditation? You know, I was looking back at the Higher Ed Committee Forum on Consolidation, and I happened to pause it at a certain point, and I look up, and on my screen was a slide from a PowerPoint that says that that single accreditation is necessary for, and it lists various things. As far as I'm concerned, I think as far as all of us are concerned, it's just plain false. I was looking at false, you know, a PowerPoint slide with several false statements on it. And I think I'm tired of being on the receiving end of what I feel is propaganda or misstatement. Like, I just don't want to invite another moment of putting that on paper when it cannot be addressed. So I want, you know, I think we want factual statements in writing. And then we can have the discussion based on those factual statements when there is the ability to sort of go back and forth and really get to what's being stated. Go ahead, Ron.
Maybe a question to get to David's point about alignment could be, why do these alignment proposals lack an occupational outlook? Why do they lack program advisory boards? Why do they lack program review schedule? Why do they lack enrollment projections? Why do they lack information on necessary resources? In other words, these are proposals that the board would never, ever approve if they came from an individual college, but somehow these proposals are adequate enough for a brand new college that they're building. The proposals lack about 80% of the information that you would need to approve a new program.
Right.
And it's just not in there. So maybe a question about, you know, how can you be sure that these programs will survive, are viable, okay, when the proposals lack information on occupational outlook, they lack information on necessary resources, they lack information on advisory boards, they lack information on program review schedule, they lack information on the faculty able to teach them at every single campus. I mean, the list goes on and on and on in terms of what's missing from these proposals. So given all this missing information, how can you be sure that these programs will be successful?
Okay. So I've added that to the shared document, if you're looking at it.
Yeah, that's good.
And I'll ask you for precise wording later, Ron, because I know I missed a couple of the things you mentioned. Okay. All right, so if these are questions, and is that fine, David? Do you agree that, you know, the why questions could be reserved for later, and the what we could focus on that now?
Good division.
Yeah. And okay, so any additional questions? Let's pretend like we have universities and Charter Oak existent in the world.
Well, it's the question which always I bring up is the distinct missions of the community colleges and the universities. And that has been not respected, at least from what I can see at board meetings, because all focus has been on students first, or just the usual approval of matters related to the universities coming from ASA or from the Finance Committee. So I think the distinct missions, how is the board planning, or how has the board in the past executed its legislative mandate to respect the distinct missions of the universities and colleges? And I think that's a real problem, which I think some members of the board actually recognize. It's a fairly small board. It's looking after 17 different institutions. Even if you make all of the community colleges into one big community college, it is a huge number of students and faculty with distinct missions for the community colleges and universities. Obviously, there's overlap in terms of our teaching. There are differences in terms of research and service. There are differences also in terms of the how the disciplines are represented and the level of courses that are taught. How is the board doing that? And that includes, for example,
We ask in 2 phases, so since the board's inception and also since 2017 in particular.
Yeah, that's fine.
Could I just suggest that we ask one question where I hope against hope we will all have shared facts about? Could we start out with, why is the sky blue?
That can go horribly wrong. Have you read Shuangzi?
No.
You're going to get a different answer from a physicist than you will from a philosopher. I can tell you that much.
Exactly.
I
We can
would
fight about that right now.
I would defer to the physicist on this one. Of course, there's also the question: why is the sky dark at night? If there's all those stars out there in an infinite universe, or potentially infinite universe, those are interesting questions in the history of science.
But I think we need to ask a question that we know we can get shared facts on.
Alrighty.
Or I could just share my electric bill again and it would be.
That would be great.
Better than mine. I was jealous.
Okay, are we ready for a vote on this? No addition?
I'll move this, Kalena.
Okay. Second?
Second.
All right. All in favor of this list in front of us, and I have not yet added the one that is in our chat from Fran, going forward to the system office for written responses by June 4th.
So you're including the distinct missions question?
Yes, yeah, that's been added. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, and Mike, is that it? Was that a hand in just for voting, right? Okay. Any opposed? Okay, and any abstentions? All right. Thank you. We have a list. The world may become clear very soon. Okay, 9, FAC elections. So we are getting there. Again, the universities are kind of fine, right? And so is Charter Oak. You guys can do this really easily, really quickly, but we have a 2-step process for the community colleges. I know for sure that I have heard from Asnuntuck, Housatonic, Manchester, Naugatuck Valley, Middlesex, and Gateway. I don't think I have anything from, is Mike Emanuel still with us? Not Northwestern? Okay, I don't see Mike. All right, so I'm still waiting for Northwestern. Lois, how's it looking at Norwalk?
We're done. I'll email you.
Okay, great. Jen, how are you doing at Three Rivers.
Can I go next? Because I have to deal with some loud noise in the background for one.
Okay, sure. Fran, are you guys all set at Tungus?
The 20th.
Okay.
And hopefully I'm gonna run again. I don't know if I'll be opposed or not. We'll have to figure that out. We'll vote at the meeting, I guess. But I will run again.
Hope to keep you.
Thank you.
See. Quinnebog, I will reach out. No one's here. And Paul, how's Capitol looking? Do we have you still?
Yeah, well, we're going to settle that at our next Senate meeting this month,
Okay.
and I'll get back to you.
Okay, so we're doing okay. I
excuse
just
me.
have to.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
This is Jen from Three Rivers. So I'm going to run again, and everyone already unanimously voted at my Senate meeting that they want me to run again. So I think I'm good.
Good. Yeah, so I think Middlesex is having some trouble finding someone, but might, actually, I saw someone here. Joe, you're not from Middlesex. Joseph, I don't even know who you are, and I'm calling you Joe. You're not from Middlesex, are you?
No, I'm from Naugatuck Valley.
Oh, okay, that's right. You were with Ron. That's right. Okay. So yeah, Middlesex is having trouble. I think, yeah, but they do have like a couple folks who might be visiting us and just keeping in contact. So we'll have to figure out how to run the election. I guess they will default to second alternate, I suppose, if that's the way it has to be. So it looks like we are in perfect shape. Jen has jumped on the election, right, Jen? And Barbara is the person who really knows how this runs, so she'll take us through it. And it looks like we will be set to go like right at the beginning of next semester, which means that we can bring people in. They can start participating if we have new folks next fall, so that we can transition nicely in January. So we're looking good. And how many universities have actually done the election? Have any?
CCSU the election is being held now.
Okay.
So it's hotly contested.
Haha.
I have invited my opponent to this meeting, who has previously beaten me in another election. We'll see.
But David, my campaign speech was vote for the other guy.
Thank you, Mark. Well, that makes me feel better.
Okay.
I'm glad you're joining us today.
Easton won't have our election until December.
Okay, December. Okay.
Yeah.
And then Western, we don't have anyone here, so okay. So we're in decent shape then. That's good. It was slow at first. So okay. So once we have and if you need it still, there's a little blurb to share with governance leaders. I think sometimes folks have trouble describing exactly what we are. So 10, format for meetings for fall semester. What do we want to do? So I teach in New Haven, but I stayed in West Hartford partly because I knew I was going to be participating in FAC and other things. I live 10 minutes away from our usual meeting spot. But this is super easy. The human connection is also really cool. And next semester is going to be pretty uncertain. I'm wondering if we want to keep doing things virtually and at a meeting, we're going to have to list it as a public meeting. But add at least one meeting per semester where we just meet and socialize, no action items, discussion or whatever else. We could try that next semester, see what we think for the following semester. Because I know some of you have commutes that are like a day long, right? Lois, I think you're driving for like 6 hours or something.
Kalina?
Yeah.
Hi, the executive order for accommodations for public meetings during the pandemic will expire July the 20th, I think, something like that, which means every public meeting of our committees, all of our committees, including the advisory committees, must have a physical point of origin. So if someone from the public wants to attend a committee meeting or the full board meeting, we have to have someone, an administrator or a faculty member, begin that meeting somewhere. A location of your choice somewhere on the CSCU system campuses.
Would it be possible, like, so I'm just imagining what could happen here, because we also can talk about rotating these meetings in person to different colleges and whatever it might be, or and universities and so on.
I mean, the
So we can
committee,
talk
the
about
committee,
that, but would
the
it work
committee
if-
can still, I'm sorry, the committee can still attend virtually.
Mhm.
But as an open meeting, you have to have somewhere central. And in addition to publicizing your WebEx link and your YouTube link or whatever it happens to be, you need to publicize that physical location for the meeting to be originated from.
So if we
Excuse
chose to
the-
do this, I could actually run the meeting from our usual room. And it all
From a-
well, anyone who wants to be there in person could be there, but we
Correct.
could all be, okay.
Correct. So, you know, the library at Gateway or wherever you happen to be, or however it works. Everybody else can be virtual. We just need to have the public have a way to physically be present.
But not my house.
Not your house, because unless you're billing out your residents, your beautiful library behind you to you're charging us rent.
Okay. Thanks.
It's like
What
a
are your
hybrid
thoughts?
meeting.
Pardon?
It's like a hybrid meeting. That is to
Yes,
say,
it is just a hybrid. Yes, it is a hybrid. We just need that one physical location.
Go ahead, Jen.
So if you have an ADA accommodation to not go on campus and meetings move to on campus, would I just have to ask the chair to send me a WebEx and set it up so that I could be part of the meeting?
It would function just as it is now. That the entire committee would receive the WebEx link, and whoever wants to attend in person can do so, and whoever wants to stay virtual for whatever reason, scheduling, transportation, however it works, could attend virtually as well.
Even after eventually, if things go back to fully on ground?
Even it improves our accessibility to have both a virtual accessible meeting as well as a physical in-person meeting. So yes, even after we go back to pre-pandemic.
the new normal.
Prior to the pandemic, there was always a call-in number for the meeting.
Always
So,
a call-in number,
yeah.
yes. Mhm.
So that part's not changing, so much.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
So that's for any meeting after July. I think you're.
Okay. Go ahead, Fran.
Just a follow-up question for Pam. Does the person originating the meeting have to be at the physical location, or could any member
Yes.
of the committee? Okay, thank you.
Yes,
That's all I
whoever,
needed.
excuse me, no, let me be a little more clear. The person who originates the meeting could be a member of the committee or an administrator or an executive administration person or someone closely associated with your committee, just to press the button and hit the live stream. So for example, for the board, because I have to take minutes and run and ensure that I've got a WebEx meeting linked to YouTube, I can't meet the public. I can't ensure social distancing and all of those kinds of things, capacity issues in the boardroom. We'll rotate an administrative assistant to be in the physical boardroom to handle anyone from the public who might want to attend.
So it sounds like we have the flexibility to say to continue, virtual if we want, or to go back if we want. We just have to sort out the details of exactly how we'll satisfy that one. Okay.
Yeah, we just want to make sure that your committee and all the other committees have as much flexibility to conduct as much business as possible.
Great.
That's my goal, so.
I mean, I've really appreciated the way that we have all of this stuff recorded, and recorded well. You know, sometimes when we have it, even with the board meetings and so on, you can go back and say, what was that detail? And you can look back at it. So I've really appreciated that. I mean, so much better than minutes and, oh my goodness, yeah.
Yeah,
Hold on,
and we still, for accessibility, we still need to provide the written transcription of it. But even YouTube will provide closed captioning for free, which we, you know, prior to the pandemic, we really never took full advantage of. So we're making progress, and that's what we're baby steps.
Nice.
Okay, so
Anthony wants
that's
to run the meeting.
So thoughts, preferences?
I'm kind of looking forward to meeting people in person, but that's just me. I'm about an hour away, so you know, assuming the meeting was at the board headquarters. But you know, other people, and there may be occasions for me when I want to do it remotely as well. So I do like the idea of this hybrid.
Yeah, it's high flex. Yeah, and I would love to meet all of you live and in person. Starting a new job during a pandemic has been way fun, kids. They're a little
Looking forward to it, Pam.
Yes, it will be fun soon.
Do you know when you're back in the office yet?
I've been going in when I have big meetings that I need to ensure bandwidth for, that I don't drop off calls and lose participants and things like that. So I have been going in randomly, but my plan is to go in 3 days a week starting June 1st.
Okay.
Just because I can't go in, you know, I got to start not wearing bunny slippers and things. You know, I packed a great wardrobe. I'd kind of like to unpack it. So
Actually, Pam, I share something. We have something in common. Whenever I have a Zoom meeting or an online meeting, I put on my shoes, just so I'll be ready for the day when I actually have to show up in person.
I think I'm going to start doing that, David. I'll follow your lead then.
Yeah, it's kind of like preparation.
There you go.
Okay, we don't have to make a final decision now, I'm sure. We still have the June meeting. Do we want to just think about it and see what the world feels like? I mean, I think things are changing. We know what our options are now.
Yep.
Okay. Sounds good. And thank you so much, Pam. I'm so glad you were here to walk us through the details.
I like being involved with faculty. It'd be my root.
Your origin, right?
It is. Yes,
Yeah.
it is.
Excuse me. Are we still doing 1 to 4 moving forward, or because that's the best time slot? Okay.
That's always been the time. Is it still clashing for you, Jen, with PA 1240? Because we can be a lot more mindful of that next year.
It probably will here and there. I'm hoping it won't so frequently as it did last year, but they meet from 1 to 3. So, but as I get a better, I don't think things will be as tense on that committee necessarily. So I might have more flexibility to hop back and forth. Whereas for the last couple of meetings, I really had to go to that one. It was more dire to go to that one.
Yeah.
So
and it was really great having it's nice to have that crossover with you on both committees. So yeah. All right. Okay, so we'll think about it. We know the details. Old and new business. Did we lose Pam just like that? We did. Anything? Anyone? Alrighty then. Motion to adjourn.
So moved. And I see seconded by Mike Shea.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Alrighty. We made it.
Good job this year, Kalina.
Yeah. Wonderful.